This is where it gets darker. Soldiers who broke down were subjected to treatment designed to shame them back to sanity. British doctor Lewis Yealand pioneered a technique using electric shocks. He would strap men to chairs and apply electrical current to their throats, jaws, and tongues, while shouting at them to speak or to walk. Sessions lasted hours. Men would scream and vomit from the pain, but Yealand insisted this was therapeutic. He published case studies bragging about how quickly he could cure mutism. What he was actually doing was torturing traumatized men.
Did you know I was personally dragged into the whistleblowing about the sexual abuse, trafficking of vulnerable women at the non-profit organization with a false accusation by the female central to my story? I had support from some famous people like...
One man told me about being beaten by the police and left permanently disabled because of a woman's false allegation.
The injustice I experienced in Calgary, Alberta as an innocent person. Being falsely accused by someone using a female personally dragging me into exposing the abuse/sex trafficking of vulnerable women at a mental health non-profit organization. This implicated influential people, the local police, politicians, and governing bodies. Being ambushed, beaten and falsely charged with alleged assaulting a police officer and obstruction. Charged with countless of court appearances over many years. Not knowing what was waiting for me next. Being wrongfully convicted despite the evidence contrary. With the feeling of being raped as I entered prison each weekend over a span of years. Learning the false narratives being said about me destroying my personal and professional reputations. To finally being forced to withdraw my lawsuit. Not being able to obtain employment reflecting my education or career history, and not being able to find other employment due to being partly disabled, overqualified, my age and now with serious health issues. Living in the aftermath destitute and partly disabled for years. My vehicle has been my home for many years. Shellshock experienced by me since 2012 to today. Then I have my own personal things going on in my life.
Hello, it's February 2026. Now this video is somewhat inspired by something I've said for many years, especially over the past recent years. And that is, everything is a literal war of attrition. A war of attrition for the mind. Now weak people, they will react. And their reactions are based on emotions. And usually their emotions are fear. And they can't control it. And they do mental gymnastics in their minds to say, well, this is bravery. In contrast, we see strong people, for example. They endure. They endure, they go the distance, and they survive. We can see examples of this, for example, in wars, world wars. How there were survivors of wars. People, the commoners, survived to tell their story. They didn't go and protest and march and write petitions and sit around discussing and patting each other on the back and complicating the uncomplicated. They survived. They did. They didn't talk, but they did. Now perhaps there were people who did these things, petitioning and marching and protesting in the middle of war. We don't hear about them because they were simply erased, because, dare I say, they didn't matter. Maybe some names might still pop up here and there, maybe a photo of someone that there's no name to. They try to resurrect that, but it doesn't matter because whatever they tried didn't stop anything. Now, people who truly experience tyranny, for example, with false accusations and wrongful convictions, and these are the foundations of tyranny. Now, before anyone starts to try to say, well, no, I don't agree, I don't care if you don't agree, I'm stating an observable fact, because everything ultimately leads to a false accusation and a wrongful conviction. And these things are enforced through the threat of violence, and at times, sometimes violence. Ultimately. And these are the foundations of tyranny. And people who experience real tyranny have the same psychological negative impacts as those, for example, prisoners of war. And there are many studies that I've shown these studies, how the parallels. Now, I'm not stating or implying that they're both equal, for example, nor am I saying implying one is worse than the other. I'm just simply stating what studies have shown. How people who experience real tyranny through false accusations and wrongful convictions are impacted the same. Where we see a lot of people who are actually trying to fight as a descriptive for truth, justice, and freedom are people who, for example, have first-hand knowledge of something and have independent evidence of the said on any topic. And these people sacrifice everything to try to help society, the commoners. And because of their efforts, they experience false accusations of some sort, wrongful convictions, and these two elements alone are to vilify them in the eyes of the other commoners. So people don't pay attention, nobody cares. And people, the commoner, only cares about what they're programmed to care about. And there's different flavors of Kool-Aid for different types of people. You have people on one side going on about one thing. You have people on the other side doing the same about something else. But going back to these real people, for example, who actually experience tyranny, they've sacrificed everything, and they live with the psychological impact, the negative psychological impact that a prisoner of war lives with for the rest of their lives. Especially when someone has had their lives or their life ruined personally, professionally, and perhaps even physically. And they struggle. When we look at people who officially do something for society, we're all perceived, and for whatever reason, I'm not getting into that part, and they commit their lives to it and sacrifice, perhaps at times even their own sanity for these things. There's a form of compensation that is offered to them. But people using the descriptive whistleblower, there's nothing. And in fact, not only are they not recognized by official types or even mainstream, but they're not even recognized by the commoners that they try to help. But the psychological impact, especially living in the aftermath, is very real. And that's what I really want to highlight here, is people, for example, and there's many people you've never heard of, like myself, that suffer quietly and try to survive. And they struggle. And and at times try to survive impossible situations because of where they've been placed in life. You never see these people when they're alone, crying, sad, perhaps alone, reflecting, remembering their life when life was better, when they were happy. For some, they don't even remember what it's like to be happy. They're just in survival mode mentally and physically in the sense of the world around them. For some, they even have health issues to survive. They endure, and they're going the distance. Contrast all this with people who, for example, are deemed by certain groups, certain movements as heroes, who have sacrificed nothing but perhaps gained everything. What are these people? Just things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
By simulating, by faking a single symptom, which was that we said that we heard voices, and the voices said, empty, dull, thud. The moment we were admitted to the hospital, we abandoned our symptom, and we behaved the way we usually behave. The question was, would anyone detect that we were sane? The answer was, no. No one ever did. Admitted with the diagnosis in the main of paranoid schizophrenia, we were discharged with the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia in remission. The average contact of patients with staff was about 6.5 minutes a day.
The controversy regarding the myth of mental illness and psychiatry is not about science or medicine, it's about power.
Just remember, I was one man against many. Fighting a losing battle, but I still fought to the end.
That means press on, that means endure, that means God cannot fail, and you're not going to give up. That's not an option for a child of God. This means you are going to be remembered. Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.